Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about the Week 9 waiver wire targets for the 2022 fantasy football season. I'd like to welcome you guys to the first bipocalypse of the 2022 season, as we have 6 teams going into Week 9 that are on bye. As you can see to the right of me, these teams are the Cleveland Browns, Denver Broncos, let's ride. We have the Dallas Cowboys, we have the New York Giants, Pittsburgh Steelers, and San Francisco 49ers. If it wasn't already difficult enough for us to put together rosters due to the injuries our teams have sustained, now we have to deal with so many of our prospects going on bye week. If in fact you're not impacted by the bipocalypse this week, congratulations, you're going to pretty much come away with a free victory, while other teams are going to struggle. But that's exactly what we're going to try to face this week and try to help you succeed in terms of building a roster that can help you win in your Week 9 matchup. Of course, we're going to be talking about players at the primary positions, whether it's running back, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, kicker, and defense, going into Week 9 that are not only going to help you this week, but hopefully be a part of your team and help you win a 2022 fantasy football championship. So that's the goal of today's episode. Before we begin, if you haven't yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy football content for the singular purpose of not only helping you win on your weekly matchups, but of course helping you win a 2022 fantasy football championship. So help us get to our goal of 80,000 subscribers by clicking the subscribe button down below. Thank you very much. Also, later tonight after the Monday Night Football game, I will be live streaming here on the channel. Of course, so if you guys have any questions regarding some trade targets and or you have some questions regarding the waiver wire, you can go ahead and join us later tonight after the Monday Night Football game between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Cleveland Browns. Now, speaking of said game, for those of you who want to continue to play daily fantasy and you perhaps don't have anybody playing in tonight's game, you can go ahead and check out Prize Picks. Prize Picks gives you another opportunity to play daily fantasy and pick more or less on a given player statistic, like we all typically try to do, predicting player success in fantasy football, or in some instances, their failures. Now, as you can see to the right of me, we have player statistics, for example, receiving yards in tonight's game. If you want to go ahead, travel to their website, there's a link down in the description, and use promo code Andrew. When you use the code, you'll be given a first-time deposit match up to $100. So for those of you who are interested, check that out today and play some daily fantasy via Prize Picks tonight in the Monday Night Football game. Again, there's a lot of potential here, especially considering these are first half numbers. If you just go to the full game numbers as a whole and you just go to receiving yards, we got a lot of them already for tonight's game. So check that out. Use promo code Andrew and have some fun. Thank you very much. Now, the final thing I wanted to mention before we get into today's video is, of course, majority of the prospects that I do mention are already being rostered in some capacity of leagues, but I typically try to avoid the players that are rostered in more than 50% of formats on Yahoo. So if in fact you see a player that isn't on today's list and you feel that they should be rostered in your league, then players like Khalil Herbert, players like Nyheim Hines, Alexander Mattison, they should already be rostered. This isn't even a conversation that we need to technically have, but I wanted to mention it first and foremost. Guys like, Dante Foreman should have been rostered last week, and going into this week, I'm not mentioning them because they have a very high rostership percentage via Yahoo. Now, let's get into it, shall we? Speaking of a bunch of running backs, let's begin with our number one running back going into Week 9. Of course, I wanted to mention Tyler Allgeier for the singular purpose of, yes, he is currently rostered in 54% of Yahoo leagues, but this is the only player that I'm going to mention at this level of capacity, because even though we do see Cordero Patterson returning, it does not mean anything for Tyler Allgeier and his potential, because if in fact this team is going to continue to utilize 2 or more running backs at a capacity of 10 plus rushing attempts per game, then when Cordero Patterson comes back and becomes the RB1, of course, they're going to transition Tyler Allgeier as the RB2. And from what we've seen already thus far this season from the Atlanta Falcons offense, they love to utilize a second running back at a purpose of just getting a bunch of yards and just tiring out the defense. That's exactly what this team has done over the course of the season. And the fact that Tyler Allgeier got himself some utilization in the receiving game, 3 targets, 3 catches, 46 yards, and a receiving touchdown on Sunday for 16 fantasy points, of course, makes him a valuable option going forward, especially considering the strength of schedule for the Atlanta Falcons and the ease of said schedule. Again, if you guys haven't checked out my strength of schedule for the rest of the season video, it was posted last Thursday. It has Cordero Patterson on it. Check it out. Thank you very much. All right, moving on to Latavius Murray. Even though Latavius Murray is going on a bye week, this is 2 consecutive weeks where he has scored a goal line touchdown within this offense. Not only did he out-touch Melvin Gordon on the ground in terms of rushing attempts, but late in that game when they needed him most, Latavius Murray stepped up, scored the game-winning touchdown, and that's all she wrote. He's going to continue to get some utilization on the ground and, of course, through the air. I think this is a running back going forward in a 50-50 split with Melvin Gordon could very easily dominate the goal line attempts like we have seen him do 2 out of the 3 touchdowns that they have scored via running backs over the course of the last 2 weeks. And if that's going to continue to be the case, there is certainly a lot of precedent to go ahead and pick him up, even though we're going into a bye week for the Denver Broncos. Moving on to Kyren Williams. Now, a couple of the reports that we heard a couple weeks ago in regards to this backfield was, of course, Kyren Williams had a potential of being in the mix prior to his injury that landed him on the injured reserve. The expectation is that he is going to return, and many of you have already gone ahead and picked him up considering he's already rostered in 45% of Yahoo leagues. But if in fact you have an opportunity to go ahead and pick him up, the reason why it's so vital to go after a Rams running back at this current moment in time is because as we get closer and closer to the trade deadline and a deal doesn't get done, there's more of an opportunity for a running back like Kyren Williams to take over this backfield. Because from what we saw yesterday, and for those of you who were with us Sunday morning when we talked about Ronnie Rivers was given the start. And many people in the chat during the live stream yesterday were telling me, Andrew, on Reddit, someone had said that they were friends with the athletic trainer for the LA Rams, and because of that, they knew that Ronnie Rivers was going to start. Let's be honest, that is absolutely crazy. I didn't want to believe it, but hey, I guess it was true. Now, that being said, the fact that they're giving Ronnie Rivers rushing attempts and giving him the starting spot over Darrell Henderson speaks volumes as to what they want to do with this backfield. They want to find a new number one. And quite frankly, they believe that that guy is not on roster unless it is going to potentially be Kyren Williams. So as of right now, I would absolutely want to go ahead, pick him up, and assuming nobody gets traded to the LA Rams within the next 24 hours, he is in a fantastic position to be, one of the lead backs of this team. And hopefully maybe the RB1 and give us some semblance of value as a waiver wire pickup that could, for the rest of the season, be a solid RB2, maybe high-end RB3 option within the offense, assuming he gets some sort of utilization as a receiver or the goal line work exclusively. Because again, Darrell Henderson, Malcolm Brown, Ronnie Rivers, none of them looked great yesterday, and that speaks volumes to, of course, their continual search for a primary back. All right, moving on to our number 4, we have Rachaad White. Now, again, the next 3 backs that I'm going to talk about are just handcuffs in general. Again, the primary handcuffs that already should be on roster for every league and currently are rostered in more than 40% of leagues are Nyheim Hines. Of course, considering the Jonathan Taylor recent ankle re-aggravation in yesterday's game against the Washington Commanders, and Alexander Mattison. Of course, we know how much value Mattison has if in fact something is to happen to Dalvin Cook. But another player that obviously has themselves a pretty storied history of injuries is Leonard Fournette. And as we continue to see Rachaad White get more and more opportunity, Leonard Fournette continued to struggle in the last 2 weeks in terms of running the ball. Rachaad White absolutely needs to be on roster. So please go ahead, do yourself a favor, have him on roster, because we know Leonard Fournette could be in that transition period of where they don't want to continue to utilize him at the capacity, slow him down, get those receiving work in the direction of Rachaad White, and potentially make him a singular value that could even be started as a flex player if in fact push comes to shove with Leonard Fournette's overall effectiveness not being there this season. Moving on, James Cook's our number 5. Again, if in fact anything is to happen to Devin Singletary, James Cook is absolutely the next man up, considering Zach Moss has been inactive in the last couple games here. So if in fact James Cook continues to get himself more opportunity in this backfield, similar to how we saw on Sunday night, where they obviously gave him 5 rushing attempts for 35 yards, had himself a reception for 41 yards, a big play there. If they continue to get him utilization, and maybe something is to happen to Devin Singletary, we have a fantastic strength of schedule for the rest of the way, and a running back associated with the best offense in the National Football League, which of course means more fantasy points. Moving on to the final option, it is Jaylen Warren. Najee Harris just does not look himself. And when I say himself, I mean the 2021 version of what he put forth. And obviously Jaylen Warren looks like the far more efficient back. 6 carries, 50 yards, 8.33 yard per carry average, had himself 3 targets, 3 receptions, 25 receiving yards, had himself 9 fantasy points. Literally almost had more fantasy points than Najee Harris with significantly less touches overall and less snaps played. If Jaylen Warren continues to be this guy that is going to be in the mix, again, you want to have handcuffs available, especially for players like Najee Harris who are slowing down and may actually be dealing with an injury that we're just not privy to at this moment, and they may shut him down in future weeks. So Jaylen Warren, something that we want to keep an eye on. All right, moving on. Let's talk about the wide receiver position, beginning with our number 1, Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson should be rostered in your league. I want to let that already be known. But if in fact somebody had dropped him and you have the ability to go ahead and pick him up, absolutely, let's go after him. Now, yesterday, for majority of the stream, I talked about how I don't trust any of the wide receivers for the New York Jets, specifically because of Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson, in weeks 6 and 7, had a total of 44 passing attempts. So, obviously throwing the ball 22 times a game is not enough for that offense. Then they go ahead and flip the script. And yesterday, they threw the ball 41 times alone. With Corey Davis being out, with Elijah Moore not getting any sort of utilization, Garrett Wilson, 6 catches, 115, 7 targets, 14.5 fantasy points, and quite frankly, should be the leading receiver for this team and should get this utilization every single week. Now, I can't guarantee you he's going to get that kind of opportunity every week, but the hope is that he does within this offense because they know that without Breece Hall, it's going to be that much more difficult to run the ball going forward. Moving on, Rondale Moore is our number 2. Rondale Moore had himself another fantastic performance. Currently only rostered in 35% of leagues. Obviously, in week 7, he had himself an underwhelming performance in that short week against the New Orleans Saints. But the entire game plan for that game was give DeAndre Hopkins the ball and let's run the ball with Eno Benjamin. Outside of those two things, of course, nobody else was utilized to a high capacity. But Rondale Moore, this week against the Minnesota Vikings, again, this is the second time in his career that he's torched the Minnesota Vikings. You go back to 2021, he did the exact same thing. This week, 7 catches, 92 and a touchdown. Obviously, the touchdown that he had, if you guys had saw that play, pretty much 3 broken tackles or 3 missed tackles. I don't know how you want to, emphasize it, but either way, it was incredible to see this guy just slip through and walk into the end zone for a 30-yard tutty. But either way, in the next couple of weeks, when Marquise Hollywood-Brown comes back, the relevancy and the target share that he has seen is going to diminish. So we have maybe 1, maybe 2 good weeks left of Rondale Moore, and then we're done with that. Because if DeAndre Hopkins is going to continue his reign of targets in the last 2 weeks, 14 and 13, Marquise Hollywood-Brown will return, get himself 8 to 10 targets, and then Rondale Moore will be pretty much relegated to 4 to 5 targets a game, which unfortunately is not going to be enough for his fantasy value. Moving on to Romeo Doubs. Now, my hope is that the Green Bay Packers sign a wide receiver or trade for a wide receiver in the coming days, but as of right now, with Lazard, Cobb, and Watson all being injured within this team's lineup, Romeo Doubs is the number 1. And obviously the touchdown that he grabbed was fantastic. The fact that he only had 4 targets, in my opinion, is mainly a factor of Aaron Rodgers, the pressure that he was facing last night and the great overall coverage of the Buffalo Bills. But going forward, again, another one of these wide receivers that currently rostered in 46% of leagues should be rostered continually because we know that there is a lot of value within the number 1 wide receiver position of a Green Bay Packers Aaron Rodgers-led offense. So as of right now, we're trusting in Romeo Doubs. But don't be surprised if somebody else gets, picked up within the 24 hours here. And if, in fact, that's going to be the case via trade, Romeo Doubs' value obviously diminishes. Moving on to our number 4, we have Josh Palmer. Listen, Josh Palmer is going to be a fantastic pickup, considering he's only rostered in 24% of leagues. And Mike Williams is most likely going to miss, I'd say maybe 3 to 4 more weeks here with his ankle injury. Let's talk about what Josh Palmer has already done this year. Since week 2, he has averaged 7.2 targets, 4.6 receptions, 47 receiving yards, and 0.2 receiving touchdowns per game. That's an 8.2 half PPR fantasy point per game average, which honestly is fantastic. We'll take that. But in the 3 games this season where he has seen 7 or more targets, he has got himself 10 plus fantasy points in every single one of those games. With Keenan Allen coming back, probably slow to return, but still, the fact that he's going to return and there's no Mike Williams, and Josh Palmer already plays the outside receiver role, there's going to be a lot of potential for success with this wide receiver, getting himself a boatload of targets, especially considering the upcoming schedule for the Los Angeles Chargers. They take on the Atlanta Falcons this week. The Atlanta Falcons give up the most points to opposing wide receivers on a weekly basis thus far this season on average in a half PPR scoring format. Of course, we just saw DJ Moore torch them the week prior. We saw Higgins, Boyd, and Jamar Chase go nuclear on them. I'm expecting a lot of success from Josh Palmer this week and for weeks ahead. Moving on to Mecole Hardman. Now, Mecole Hardman was one of the top waiver wire targets from last week's video, but a lot of you didn't pick him up because he went on bye. He's currently rostered in 35% of leagues. And I understand that there's Kadarius Toney out there, and Kadarius Toney currently rostered in already 57% of leagues. Maybe he's not available in your league anymore because of all the information from last week, but you got to remember, in the last 3 games, weeks 5 through 7, Mecole Hardman has scored a touchdown in every single one of those games. Whether it has been a rushing touchdown, a receiving touchdown, even a special teams touchdown, he's getting it done on all 3 phases of that level. Now, I know in the last 3 games in terms of averages, he's only getting about 4.33 targets per game, 3.67 receptions per game, 49 receiving yards, but the fact that he's gotten himself, at least a touchdown per game minimum, it gives me enough confidence to go after Mecole Hardman, who currently is, again, may be available in your league going forward within one of the best offenses in the National Football League. Again, like I mentioned Kadarius Toney, there are other players like Darnell Mooney, Wan'Dale Robinson, Devin Duvernay that should already be rostered in your league, but if they're not, again, those guys maybe take priority. But again, when I looked at their rostership percentages, they were relatively high in comparison. Moving on to Treylon Burks. Treylon Burks is the final wide receiver within the top 6. Of course, we have 7 through 12 in just a moment, but the top 6 finishes off with Treylon Burks, who's only rostered in 17% of leagues. Currently, he's on the injured reserve and is expected to return in either week 9 or 10. Besides that, the wide receivers for the Tennessee Titans have been nothing this year. Kyle Phillips just recently went to the injured reserve, and in the absence of Treylon Burks, the only thing that Robert Woods has been able to accomplish in the last 3 games is 14 targets, 9 catches, 89 yards, and 11.4 total fantasy points in the last 3 games. Not enough production. I expect Treylon Burks, healthy, to come back from that turf toe and immediately be the number 1 receiving option because they don't so desperately need someone to fill in that role and dominate on a downly basis. Moving on, let's talk about our 7 through 12 wide receivers. A lot of, potential guys here that may be available. That's why I wanted to mention 7 through 12, because for those of you who looked at 1 through 6 and were like, these guys are all rostered, which typically they should be in a, 12-team league with a ample amount of bench slots. But let's say, for example, these guys are available. Let's talk about Odell Beckham Jr. Under the assumption that he gets signed in the next couple of days, whether it's the Packers, whether it's the Rams, whether it's the, Bengals, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, there's a lot of potential here for Odell Beckham Jr. All the rumors are pointing towards him going to a team that obviously has Super Bowl potential and upside. Maybe it's the 49ers. You don't know. But as of right now, maybe it's the Bills. Dude, there's so many teams that he could arrive to, which would give him efficient enough fantasy value based on the targets that he would garner to make him a startable option at a healthy capacity. Now, the question is, how healthy is he? How long is it going to take? As of right now, currently only rostered in 80% of leagues. I'm willing to take the risk on OBJ. As for Mack Hollins in the last couple weeks here has actually been a really good, consistent wide receiver. Since week 2, he has averaged 6.5 targets, 4.2 receptions, 61 receiving yards, and 0.33 touchdown per game. That's a 10.19 half PPR fantasy point per game average in the last 6 contests that he has played. He's coming off of a week in which he had 9.9 fantasy points in terms of just receptions and receiving yards, 7 catches on 8 targets and 64 receiving yards. Only rosters in 7% of leagues. It looks like Hunter Renfrow has pretty much been eliminated in this offense. And with, Devontae Adams struggling, with Darren Waller not healthy yet, Mack Hollins obviously presenting a value and a relationship with Derek Carr that continues to be his safety blanket within this offense. Jahan Dotson, another one of these players who's currently only rostered in 22% of leagues. If in fact he gets healthy and he's back, we know the efficiency and the effectiveness that he has down in the red zone. Another one of these players that we want to continue to go after if in fact we can stash him on our bench. We talk about our number 10, Van Jefferson. We expect that Cooper Kupp's injury is going to keep him day-to-day and it's not going to knock him out. I know Van Jefferson's coming off of a week in which he had literally 0 targets, 0 catches, but let's just put this into perspective. Van Jefferson will be utilized, and when he does get himself the targets that he needs, of course, he will be a fantasy value. Last season in 2021, in the games that he had 6 or more targets, he averaged 10.03 half PPR fantasy points per game throughout the regular season. There was a lot of potential for them to utilize him as a deep receiving threat. And if you go ahead and you connect with Matthew Stafford, we're talking about 50-yard, 40-yard touchdowns, which could make a week within one singular play. Moving on to Damiere Byrd. Speaking of making his week in one singular play, in the last 2 weeks, he has scored 2 touchdowns. The fact that he has 2 touchdowns on 4 receptions, 2 of them on massive plays when they needed him most, obviously leads to me believing that they're going to continue to get him more and more utilization, perhaps as the number 2 receiving option outside of Drake London at the wide receiver role within this offense. The final player is Terrace Marshall. Terrace Marshall takes on the Cincinnati Bengals this upcoming week. It's going to be tough in week 9 to go up against that matchup with PJ Walker at the quarterback position. Hopefully there's going to be a connection built there. And if there is, Terrace Marshall, again, we mentioned him a lot last season in 2021, and we expected him to take over the role of Robbie Anderson. But now that Robbie Anderson's gone outright because of the recent trade to the Arizona Cardinals, Terrace Marshall has his opportunity to step up and ball out. Moving on, let's talk about tight ends. Greg Dulcich is the number 1. He was the number 1 last week and continues to be as such. He's currently rostered in 42% of leagues, which is fantastic. Thank you for picking him up, guys, and making that investment because you're not going to regret it. For those of you who still have an opportunity to pick him up, he's put up 11.4, 8.1, and 10.7 half PPR fantasy points in the last 3 games he has played. In fact, those last 3 games are his first 3 games of his NFL career. As long as this offense continues to utilize him at the capacity, he continues to be a deep receiving threat. Again, they talked about using him as a vertical threat within this offense. Obviously, he's getting more love than Courtland Sutton in the last couple weeks. And if that's going to continue to be the case, Greg Dulcich has a lot of value. Moving on to Evan Engram. Man, we talked about it at such nauseum that Evan Engram never got red zone love from Trevor Lawrence. And then all of a sudden, we're sitting there and we're watching the London game and he scores himself a touchdown early in that contest. Love to see it. Love to see him get targets inside the 10-yard line. He has one of the easiest strength of schedules for the rest of the season at the tight end position. Check out that video. I posted it last week. Has Cordero Patterson on the thumbnail. So if you check that out, it'll give you a little bit of an indication, but we're definitely continuing the ride with Evan Engram within this Doug Peterson offense. Tyler Conklin, another option here. Somebody on yesterday's live stream specifically asked me, Andrew, is Tyler Conklin worth a start? And I told them no. And I regret telling them that, but quite frankly, just look at what kind of opportunity Tyler Conklin was given the 3 prior games before yesterday's, contest against the New England Patriots. The 3 prior games, he had himself a total of 5 receptions. That is unbelievable. Now he comes out and he has himself 10 targets, 6 catches, 79 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns against the Patriots of all defenses. The fact that, of course, Zach Wilson went from 44 total passing attempts in 2 weeks to having 41 just week 8. Like, it was just crazy upside. But hey, if Tyler Conklin's going to continue to see this kind of opportunity, by all means, opportunity leads to success in fantasy football, and we're all for it. Moving on, let's talk about Isaiah Likely, a name that many of you may have been already wondering, where are we going to talk about him? Isaiah Likely, in my eyes, is maybe just a 1-week play, because we know that the Baltimore Ravens are going to be having a bye week in week 10. Isaiah Likely could fill in for Mark Andrews this week. And if that's the case, of course, he is a pick up and play for those of you who are in need of a tight end for 1 week. But if, in fact, Isaiah Likely has himself another great week here, and that's back-to-back performances where the team is like, you know what, maybe we need to get him more utilized, considering the Baltimore Ravens use 3 tight end sets more than any other team in the National Football League, I can assume that maybe Isaiah Likely gets himself more utilization, and going forward could be a prime target within this offense, running 2 tight ends down the field and dominating with Likely only rostered in 5% of leagues. Could be a fantastic option. Moving on, Cade Otton, another rookie tight end that I wanted to mention. As long as he continues to be as heavily utilized as he has been in the last couple weeks, obviously had a receiving touchdown called back last week against the Baltimore Ravens, but if he continues to be the primary blocker at the tight end position for this team, we have Cameron Brate still dealing with his injury. Kyle Rudolph is old and brittle. As of right now, Cade Otton, another one of these options within a Tom Brady-led offense that could have himself some potential. It's just tough to see it if he doesn't find himself in the end zone. Moving on to Foster Moreau. If, in fact, Darren Waller is going to miss another game, Foster Moreau, welcome to the squad. He had himself 9 targets, 6 catches, a very low average depth of target rate. But ultimately, if Darren Waller is going to be out for another week here and you're in need of a tight end, Foster Moreau could end up filling that void for a PPR format. Moving on to quarterback. The thumbnail for today's video is Justin Fields, and not by accident. Justin Fields in the last 4 weeks has had 26.04, 23.36, 18.4, and 17.02 fantasy points. 17 plus fantasy points in each of the last 4 games, and it has been gradually increasing as his rushing touchdowns, rushing yardage has been incredible. In the last couple games here, 8 rushes, 60 yards and a touchdown. 14 rushes, 82 yards and a touchdown. 12 rushes, 88 yards. 8 rushes, 47. 7 rushes, 52. 8 rushes, 47. 8 rushes, 20, and a touchdown. The fact that he's getting himself a minimum of 4 fantasy points per game rushing over the course of the last 7 games here, and he's getting himself rushing touchdowns now on the goal line. He's playing extremely efficient. 17 for 23 passing against the Dallas Cowboys secondary, 2 passing touchdowns. By all means, Justin Fields rest of the way. Fantastic fantasy option for us. Moving on to Jimmy Garoppolo. Even though he is going on bye week, you got to remember, if in fact you need an efficient quarterback that is going to get you consistent fantasy points, by all means, Jimmy Garoppolo is a fantastic investment. He has had himself 2 minimum touchdowns in each of the last 3 games. Jimmy G is going to continue to be a relevant fantasy option going forward, mainly because of the receiving threats that surround him. Now that you add Christian McCaffrey and that ability to throw the ball to the back out of the backfield to not only Kyle Juszczyk, but now to Christian McCaffrey and let him make plays after the catch, of course, Jimmy Garoppolo's value continues to increase. Currently rostered in 49% of leagues. If he's available, go for him. But currently, of course, Justin Fields, the fact that he is more available in fantasy is just, it's interesting, but we love it. Moving on, Marcus Mariota. Man, Marcus Mariota just continues to find himself a great week, then a bad week, then a great week, then a bad week. But over the course of the last 4 games, 24, 12, 24, 18. So quite frankly, 3 out of the last 4 games, he has been a consistent fantasy quarterback. Obviously, the rushing statistics similar to Justin Fields. I mean, the last 3 performances in terms of rushing, 6 rushes for 31, 6 for 50 and a touchdown, 7 for 61. Again, a lot of value to be had there going forward for this Atlanta Falcons run-first offense. Moving on to Taylor Heinicke. Taylor Heinicke balled out. Taylor Heinicke, last season, prior to his injury, weeks 1 through 14, was the number 16 overall quarterback in fantasy football, 4-point per passing touchdown in 2021. He's coming off of 2 incredible weeks where he's helped this team win. And if he continues the streak victories for the Washington Commanders, why not go ahead and keep him as a starter in comparison to Carson Wentz going forward? Moving on to Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton seems to be the guy. And if he continues to maintain this job, having himself another big win here against, the Las Vegas Raiders, if this is going to continue to be the case, of course, yes, there are going to be some plays where Taysom Hill comes in and takes away some value. But ultimately, we still think that Andy Dalton, only rostered in 14% of leagues, could be of value to us in a very, particular situation where the bye week apocalypse hurts us. Moving on to Deshaun Watson, the final player I wanted to mention. Of course, we are expecting him to return in week 13. against the Houston Texans. When he returns, of course, he's going to have himself pretty sufficient value, assuming he is anything similar to what he was a couple years ago for the Houston Texans. Of course, the amount of rushing and passing ability that this man presents on a weekly basis, of course, is valuable enough in terms of the fantasy perspective to go ahead and take a stash play on him, add him to your roster if, in fact, you have enough bench space to roster him, because we know the Bipocalypse is going to hurt many of us, so you may not have the available room at this moment in time. Moving on, let's talk about kickers and defenses before we conclude today's video. Harrison Butker is the number one. Coming off the bye week, he's currently only rostered in about 45% of leagues. If, in fact, one of your leagues is within that 55%, of course, you want to have the Kansas City kicker. Moving on to Matt Prater, another kicker that obviously was injured earlier this year. Him and Harrison Bryant missed some significant time, but Matt Prater back and better than ever. Obviously, he's going to be playing up against the Seattle Seahawks. The last time, Kyler Murray had a privilege of taking on the Seahawks earlier this year. They did not score a touchdown in that game. They scored 3 field goals, and going into this week could be a very similar situation, which obviously lends more fantasy value to Prater. Moving on to Michael Badgley. Badgley for the Lions obviously had himself a good week here, and going against Green Bay this upcoming week could have himself another fantastic performance. The Lions, their biggest inefficiency is on defense. Offensively, they're always going to be able to move the ball, and that, in my opinion, with DeAndre Swift and Amon-Ra St. Brown back, leads to potentially more field goals on a weekly basis. Moving on to the defense portion. The number one defense I wanted to mention is, of course, the Seattle Seahawks. Coming off of a great week here, and the fact that last time that they took on the Arizona Cardinals, just a couple weeks ago, they put up over 10 fantasy points. They're currently rostered in only 12% of leagues. Pretty good defensive play. Moving on to the Minnesota Vikings. We talked about them yesterday in our live stream as the number 10 defense. Obviously, 3 interceptions against Kyler is a big deal. And I think going forward, if this team continues to force a lot of turnovers, especially this upcoming week against Taylor Heinicke of all quarterbacks, very capable of doing so, they could be of value. The final defense I wanted to mention is the Cincinnati Bengals. They take on the Carolina Panthers, specifically PJ Walker. If this, in fact, this defense is elite and they are going to, potentially force a little bit of pressure on the quarterback, they could force a lot of turnovers because the secondary for the Cincinnati Bengals is far more efficient than what the Atlanta Falcons put forward on a weekly basis. All right, that's going to cover it for today's episode. Again, if you have any questions, let me know down in the comments section. I'll get to those. Again, do not forget, after tonight's Monday Night Football game, I'll be live streaming here on the channel. Again, be sure to check out Prize Picks. Put together a couple entries and use promo code Andrew when you sign up and make a first-time deposit. You'll be given a first-time deposit match up to $100. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Hopefully, this video helped you guys out. Be sure to click the like button down below. Subscribe if you have not yet already. And until tomorrow, we'll be talking about our top 36 running back rankings for Week 9. I'll see you guys. Peace.